Hello, and welcome to Strangers on a Podcast. I'm Grim Weed. Unfortunately, the conductor can't be with us today, so instead of talking about the movie we'd originally planned for this episode, we decided that this would be a good time to address an issue we ran into when planning our movie lineup. As we discussed possible rules for which movies we would cover and which we wouldn't, a few things kept coming up. Would we limit our choices to movies of a certain era? Would we limit our choices to a certain genre? Would we avoid controversial movies or movies that dealt with a controversial topic? Well, what about movies made by or starring controversial people? Essentially, we ran into quite a few hurdles we weren't prepared for. So let's get the easy ones out of the way first. Would we limit our choices to a certain era? Well, we talked about focusing on an era. The problem was there's too many other great movies that inspired those or were inspired by those. So why not talk about those too? Would we limit ourselves to a specific genre? Well, I like horror, sci-fi, comedy, some westerns, and a laundry list of other genres. The conductor likes horror and comedy, and I bet also a bunch of other genres. So why assume that you, the listener, wouldn't also like multiple genres? There's too many good movies to just focus on one genre when the point of the show is to prove that movies have the power to connect people. Sure, there's bound to be genres we focus more on, but can you really say you connected with somebody if all you know about them is their opinion on one thing? Okay, now for the bigger hurdles. Let's face it, the simple facts of the matter are there's a ton of movies out there, and if we were to avoid movies with any sort of controversy attached to them, that would take some of the greatest movies off our list. Besides, who are we to decide which controversial topics should and shouldn't be addressed? So first, let me again start with the easy bit. As far as controversial topics, are there topics in movies that we're not qualified to comment on? 100% yes. First, we're two men. We have no right to talk about movies that deal with female problems. By that, I mean everything from periods to wage gap to just plain being accepted at any level for any job you're qualified for. We can't relate to those issues. We can sympathize. We can't empathize. Same goes for racial injustice issues. I mean, we can sit and talk about how X-Men is a metaphor for acceptance and integration, but we can't really empathize with the feeling of that sort of exclusion. But when it comes to movies that do have a strong racial injustice theme, we will try and include a guest host that can relate better to those sorts of issues. And notice I said a strong racial injustice theme. That's not because if it's not too bad, we'll ignore it. It's because it's rare there's not a theme of some sort of injustice in any movie. Sometimes the subtext isn't as obvious and we miss it. Other times it's there, but it's up for interpretation on what it's really saying. So those times we feel it's best for you to decide for yourself what the movie says to you. And that brings me to the hard part. Are there movies we just won't cover? Yes, of course. The question we face, though, is how to choose which ones fall onto that list. We feel there has to be a line somewhere, but where? Ultimately, there has to be some sort of ethical guidelines we set for ourselves. And if we ignore a movie because one of the cast, crew, or production company did something morally or ethically dubious, then we'd have to do the same to every other movie that falls into that category. It would be nice, for example, to say, we refuse to discuss any movie attached to Harvey Weinstein. But not only would that take things like Rob Zombie's 2 Halloween movies and 2007's The Mist off the list, but it also removes Academy Award nominees and winners like The King's Speech, The Reader, The Artist, Silver Linings Playbook, Philomena, and The Imitation Game. People do some pretty terrible things. There's a point where one must separate the art from the artist. And that left us thinking, when does that separation turn into acceptance or compliance? What qualifiers are required for something to be seen as art, to be recognized, versus art that should never see the light of day again? And what gives us the right to decide that? If I said to you, Hey, you know that Disney movie that's coming out next week? Yeah, did you know the director is a known child predator and went to prison for filming himself abusing a child actor in one of his movies? Would you then go and see that movie, or would you personally boycott it? If you would choose to boycott it, would you also boycott all of Disney for choosing to allow a known child abuser to make a movie for them, a company known for child's movies? And, on a side note, how many of you have seen the movie Powder? The Disney movie made by the same guy that made Jeepers Creepers? The same guy that, you guessed it, went to prison for filming himself abusing a child actor in one of his previous movies? If we were to include movies like those on our list, that could be seen as an endorsement or an acceptance or dismissal of the crimes committed. And in doing so, we'd also be dismissing the feelings of the victims of those crimes and putting it out there publicly that we care more about watching a movie than we do about what they went through. It's like we're saying to them, yeah, it sucks, but hey, they're rich and make movies. They can do whatever they want. I can say we won't do Jeepers Creepers because the man should never have been put in a position of power over child actors or a child in general. And we won't contribute in any way towards him making any more money off of it. But can I say we won't ever cover a movie that had a sexual predator involved in some way with the making of the movie? Sadly, no. It's something that regrettably is so pervasive in that industry that at some point in the involvement of the making of way too many movies, you can find. So what about a different sort of abuse? Abuse or killing of animals? Well, that would throw out the first Friday the 13th right off the bat. And as a couple of guys whose first genre on the list of favorites is horror, to not talk about a movie as pivotal in horror history as Friday the 13th is just too difficult. I think the easiest way to explain our rules for what we will and won't cover is we will do our best to make sure if there's a controversy around the movie, known at the time of recording, of course, concerning sexual abuse in the movie, behind the scenes, or just a known predator involved in the making of the movie, if there's any animal or child abuse that's associated in some way with the movie, we will weigh the movie heavily on what we feel are its artistic merits. I know we aren't qualified to decide if it's art, but we are qualified to say if we can, in all good consciousness, look past the bad acts to enjoy the art that it created. If so, can we then feel good about ourselves telling others to ignore those acts and just look at the art? We'll also do our best to let you know so you can decide for yourself if it's something you can look past. However, in older movies, that's another world. Take our first movie and podcast name inspiration, Strangers on a Train. Alfred Hitchcock was a sexual predator. It isn't a huge secret. It's been said and talked about for quite a while now. I could say it wasn't mentioned in the podcast, but I would be lying. It was something that did come up a few times by the conductor and was eventually edited out. And this wasn't an attempt to hide it or an acceptance of what he did. It was purely for the sake of time and flow, because in all reality, nothing we can ever say about Hitchcock could ever matter enough to make an impact. Hitchcock's movies have been around for enough decades, and enough people have seen them that what little audience we'll ever have, even if we were to be somehow miraculously the biggest podcast ever, won't matter one bit to the history that's been made by his movies and the impact they've had on filmmaking itself. Sadly, that's the way things were for years, and it became so ingrained in that world that to this day, it's more common than many would like to admit. Luckily, some of the Hollywood scum have been removed, but I don't honestly think I can say we'll ever truly get them all. I defy you to find enough movies that have zero connection in any sort of controversy that you can sustain a podcast with. So, after all that, what are our rules? I wish I could say we know. All we can ask is for you to help us out. We will do our best to shine a light on things when we catch them, and you can help us by giving us the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes we'll miss things, and we welcome you to fill us in. We just ask you be polite about it, because we can't honestly just get everything. Finally, we just want to say to everybody, remember, we can't change the past. We can only affect the present to change the future. Thanks everyone for listening, and join us next week for some Bubba Hotep. On behalf of myself and the Conductor, thank you for listening.